Hello, everyone. This is Veronica Watson. I am Patronicity's Indiana Director. I just wanted to jump on really quick to introduce today's webinar. First, thank you all for being here. It's always exciting to see people interested in the work that we do and wanting to learn more and hopefully imagining what they can do in their own communities. But today's webinar, it's community crowdfunding, learn from the experts. It's our second in a series of 3 webinars. Today's webinar is going to be featuring 2 awesome project leaders from Massachusetts. And I did want to point out really quick that the project leaders are from a program that we run in Massachusetts called Commonwealth Places, but the majority of what they're talking about today, the tips and tricks about crowdfunding, it can apply to anyone. So don't let that scare you off if you're not in Massachusetts or you don't think this is a program that you'd be interested in. As long as you're interested in crowdfunding and community building and placemaking, this is definitely a webinar that you guys should stick around for. You should be seeing a PowerPoint right now on our wonderful Rob St. Mary's screen. Now, to our actual panelists today, the reason that you are all here. We are very lucky to have Rob St. Mary, Patronicity's Director of Outreach. He will be leading today's discussion with Eric R. Smith from the town of Athol. I hope I'm saying that right. Feel free to correct me later, Eric. And then Ben Lamb, who will also be joining and talking about the projects that they've been running in their communities. So I'm going to go ahead and jump off. Eric and Ben, I am unmuting you. And Rob, I'm going to let you take it away.
Well, thank you, Veronica. Thank you so much for taking the time to do the introduction, and thank you everyone for being here today as we learn from the experts. And what I really want to do is to give each community a chance to sort of give us an overview of what it was that they were working on and some of the best practices of what they were working on. And of course, we want to hear from you as well. If you have any questions about how crowdfunding could work in your community, what you can learn from Ben and Eric, by all means, please type them into the box and we'll get to them as we go through the webinar. To start off, the town of Athol, where Eric is. How are you doing today, Eric?
Good. Thank you very much for having me be part of this webinar. And yes, you had Athol pronounced the correct way.
Sounds good. Well, to give us the overview, who you are and what you do, and give us an idea of your role in town.
I'm the Director of Planning and Development, so I handle new development projects that are coming into the community, as well as trying to better the community through additional, open space, parks, pathways, streetscape improvements, and so forth. And as you can see from the description, Athol is a former, mill community. We were known as Tool Town because we had some large tool manufacturers. One of actually still in business today. We are actually fortunate to have our largest employer, Starrett, a precision tool manufacturer located in the downtown today. But with our other former tool making facilities, we are now trying to repurpose those, and we are blessed to have the Millers River running through our community, as well as a lot of open space, not only in Athol, but some really regional, well-renowned recreation areas in our surrounding communities as well. And in the last couple of years, there's been a movement to actually try to make some of our open spaces accessible to all users of our recreation facilities. So this project I'm going to explain about today will actually focus on one element of trying to improve that accessibility to all users of our open spaces.
Now, for the folks who live in Athol, can you give us an idea of, how they explain it to people who maybe they meet out and about, or you do, or, maybe some of the reasons why people want to be there or come there?
Well, I actually have Dave Small from my planning board on the line here, and he's a lifelong resident. Maybe he could just chime in a little bit on that as well, too. Put him on the spot.
Yeah, this is a mill town community with lots of open space around it, so even though people worked in mills all the time, they hunted and fished and bird watched and stuff all around the surrounding area. So we have a very strong connection to the outdoor world, and that's what we're trying to maintain and get more people to enjoy that.
Sounds great. Well, Eric, can you tell us a bit about your project, just briefly, in terms of what it was that you came to Patronicity with, and a little bit about the campaign?
So we were actually fortunate to receive a Massachusetts Department of Conservation and Recreation, or DCR, Recreational Trails grant for about $26,000 to put a handicap-accessible dock into the Millers River. The Millers River in this section is actually one of those what are called blue trails, for canoeing and kayaking purposes, and we have a beautiful map and guide for that. They're a very popular regional canoe and kayak race is actually held in this facility called the River Rat Race every spring, and again, it's trying to promote use of the facility to all users. Town of Orange, our neighbor, 6 miles downriver, has one of these docks, and we wanted to try to get one. And we were fortunate, again, to have this funding. However, we actually started to permit the project, and realizing that with permitting costs, that you can see now the picture on your screen, those wonderful the ramps on the side, the railings on the side. The railings were actually not part of the standard quote we received from our vendor, and I just couldn't believe that you could have a handicapped dock, accessible dock, without those railings. And so we wanted to make sure those were there. Well, we were now short of our grant funding, and we knew we couldn't go to our town with our tight municipal budget. So I actually knew about Patronicity, learned about our neighboring town, Orange, had a successful pocket park project the previous year. And we felt we could go to Patronicity MassDevelopment with a project to try to get some enhanced funding to make our project implementable, but also we were able to do some add-ons to the project. We, for example, were able to do commission a mural, which you see on the right-hand side of the screen there. We put a wayfinding sign at the front of the parking lot for this park to direct visitors to our downtown and enjoy the restaurants and businesses just a very short walk away. Traditional seating we put in there, you actually can see a bench that's actually part of this dock installation. That was another about $1,000 ticket item onto the project. And we also wanted to put a kayak and canoe storage rack up front in our parking lot. That way people who are there for the afternoon or day kayaking, canoeing, would have a time to safely store their boats while they went to our downtown again. So I think these enhancements were something I think that made this project attractive to MassDevelopment, Patronicity, and we were successful. We we're over and above our numbers on our fundraising.
And just for those numbers, for those who aren't familiar, do you know what was the raise and then what was the match and such?
Yeah, we came in with basically a $10,000 project, if you will. $5,000 was going to be what we were going to raise with a $5,000 match from the Commonwealth Places program, and we actually exceeded that. We actually came with about $6,500 in change within the 30 days we had to raise our funds. Yep, there you can see the numbers there. So ultimately, we came in $11,000 and change, and it's been nice because again, with some of these issues, sometimes with cost increases that weren't anticipated, having a little bit of a little extra cushion of funding is now part of our budget. We actually have a line item, a dock management account, and for example, the lip between the trail, you see that picture on the left, that's at our ribbon cutting ceremony last month. The lip between the trail and the ramp was really difficult to get it even. We came up with an interesting solution, but again, that was some extra funding that we didn't anticipate, and we were able to use some of that extra cash in hand to provide that successful implementation.
Sounds great. Well, I look forward to talking to you a bit more about the particulars and also, of course, folks who are on the webinar who have any questions about your project or just running a campaign in general. I want to talk just briefly to get an overview from Ben in North Adams. So, Ben, how are you today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me here.
Yeah, well, thanks for being here. Tell us a bit about who you are, name your organization, and what you do.
Sure. So my name is Ben Lamb. I am, I guess, a cheerleader for the city of North Adams would be my best title. My day job is I work at One Berkshire, which is our economic development organization here in Berkshire County. So it's countywide. I just started there a few months ago, but prior to that, I worked in higher education up here in North County. In North Adams, I'm actually one of our city councilors. However, This project in particular that we're talking about today was actually done through an organization that I helped create a few years back called the Namazing Initiative, which is NAMAZING, because we think North Adams, Massachusetts is just so amazing. And so we created this organization, and the Eagle Street Initiative is the project that we really sunk our teeth into about 2.5 years ago now. And we created this group that gets together every 2 weeks. And it includes folks that live, work, and play on the street. So you don't have to be a resident of Eagle Street, which is this, it's about a 1/4 mile long section of historic storefronts in our downtown. It's actually the oldest social and economic corridor in the city, older than our Main Street. And so we really, it's got this sense of place to it already. You can kind of see in that photo on the right-hand side there, this is the looking down the street straight. It's not always full of sand. The Eagle Street Beach Party is a tradition that we've had for 20 years now. We just had our 20th a couple weeks back, where we actually filled the entire street with 500,000 pounds of sand from a local sand producer, and we turn it into a beach for a day, which has been a really cool kind of cultural piece to North Adams as a whole. But this project overall decided to focus on how to make Eagle Street more pedestrian friendly, and also to help revitalize the spirit and the activity on the street. And so this includes a number of components. Probably the most notable is our parklet, which was installed about a month and a half ago now and has become this new center of engagement and a kind of a community hub. Without even really trying, it immediately started to attract attention. So every Friday now, there's a crew of folks anywhere from 40 to 80 people that come out at 7:30 in the morning and have coffee together at the Eagle Street Parklet. And that's really started to create some gravity around it for social engagement, people talking about new ideas and things like that. However, the pieces that we haven't installed yet, which are just as exciting, is we have a whole signage variety that's going. You can see over on the right-hand side, there's a medallion on top of a post. That was before the medallion was totally completed. I didn't have a new photo to share, but we have 2 posts going in on one end of the street to really draw attention for walking traffic, and then we will have a banner going on the other end of the street for vehicular traffic, to really celebrate this historic Eagle Street corridor that we are so passionate about and we want to celebrate even more.
I wanted to just ask really quick when it comes to the community and this Eagle Street area of North Adams. I remember looking at the pitch video for this, and you were talking about a bit about how even people who live in the community just kind of roll on by. They're really at the time you were dealing with an issue of getting people to be a little more involved in the downtown.
Yeah, so this is a long-term challenge that we face as a city. We are super blessed that we have MassMoCA, which is the Massachusetts Museum of Contemporary Art right here in North Adams. And they bring in somewhere around 200,000 visitors a year. But one of the major challenges we have is getting a circulation of people to actually, go around in the rest of downtown. And this is not an issue with just visitors. It's also an issue with locals, where it's much easier to drive and say there's no parking and try to find a parking spot elsewhere or order items online or whatever the case might be. And so what we're really focusing on is how do we make these spaces and these businesses as user-friendly to the community and visitors alike, so that we can improve that circulation of folks and draw that 200,000 people into our downtown, because that would be a game changer in terms of the economics of our downtown culture. And Eagle Street is actually the other bookend of our downtown. So you have MassMoCA on one end, you have Eagle Street on the other. And so one of our big objectives here is to create that walking pattern of folks that go from MassMoCA's gates all the way down to Eagle Street and around, and actually then migrate back down Main Street. So you end up with this cycle of folks going throughout. And we've actually already seen that starting to occur, even in just the month and a half that the parklet's been in place. And so it's exciting to see kind of proof in the pudding.
So let's talk about this campaign for you just a bit, in terms of, we're looking at the slide here, goals, numbers, and such. Mm-hmm. Just a bit about, what you were setting out to do and how it came together.
Sure. So one of the big things is we wanted to increase wayfinding. So all of the businesses are getting pedestrian-facing signage, along with those medallions and the banner going in. We didn't have trash cans on the street. We didn't have recycling on the street. So We brought this group together, we built a strategic plan, and then it happened to be that we discovered Patronicity after we had that strategic plan already designed. And so we decided to be ambitious, and we went for a $25,000 match. And so we did a 2-month campaign and ended up within, we had 2 weeks left, and we had already met our goal. And so we did a stretch goal of $35,000 to allow us to incorporate some additional artistic features into the overall plan, murals, things like that. And we hit that and even surpassed that by the end of the actual campaign. So overall, we ended up with a 60,000 plus total budget to do this entire project, which has been incredible. And we've been able to stretch those dollars even further thanks to in-kind contributions during the last year and a half. But for us, I think the most exciting part was that even though the campaign was only $25,000 or $35,000 raised, we had 225 folks actually contribute to that. So that it was mostly smaller donations, but it showed this sort of across the board investment from the community in what this project is meant to be.
Sounds good. Well, thank you so much for that. And this is sort of the section where, I've got some questions, and I kind of want to dig a little bit deeper into these projects, Ben and also Eric. And if you, dear listener and viewer who are in on with us today on the webinar, feel free to put yours in the text box. I look forward to adding your questions in as well. But sort of, to start off here, looking at Commonwealth Places, Eric, what was it about this program when you first heard of it that thought, we've got this project, we've got this idea, maybe this is the way to make it happen? What was it about this program in particular that maybe you liked?
Well, I know I alluded to this earlier, how the fact that I learned about the program through the town of Orange, our neighboring town, and it had a successful literacy project previously with their pocket park, and it just seemed like that, we were short of funding because of those cost increases to make our accessible dock truly accessible and have a successful implementation. And I think the fact that, I'm like, oh, okay, well, it seemed like we didn't need that much money, to make our project successful. It seemed like it was achievable, reachable, and I was very happy that this project existed to make our project a reality.
Now, Ben, as for yourself, what was it about Commonwealth Places when you heard about it that you thought, this may be the way to do that for that section of Eagle Street?
For us, I think it was the diversity of projects that had already gone through the program, and we saw that ours actually incorporated aspects that a lot of other projects throughout the Commonwealth had already done, and it brought them all into one lump. And it felt like it was a really great opportunity to, like I said, Eagle Street already has a sense of place. We say that, we've been saying that forever. And so when you hear Commonwealth Places, it very much so aligned with our ideology around that corridor as it was. And it was just another way for us to access resources that the community had not historically accessed. And allow for individuals to invest in their community in whatever way they could in terms of the financial piece, while also then you have this dollar for dollar match up to the $25,000 goal. So it was really kind of the stars aligning. It was also a timing piece. We had been talking about this for several months, and Jonathan Burke, who's with Patronicity, had reached out to me kind of just off the cuff, and it was this perfect alignment of the stars.
And, Ben, to kind of continue with that, though, to kind of talk about that process for you of getting involved. I mean, I think a lot of folks work for cities or they work for nonprofits who are working on these kinds of projects. There's, the RFP process. Maybe they're familiar with that. Organization puts it out and says, hey, you got to write this grant. It's 10 pages, 12 pages, something like that. It's got to be in by a certain deadline. And then the board's going to look at it. They're going to figure that out and make their decisions. As for you, through Patronicity, what was different about this process in terms of you coming in, starting a campaign, and then working it across? How did you find that system versus the quote unquote traditional grant system?
So one of the big things for me is I think with traditional grants, they're challenging because if you don't know how winning grants are submitted, then you don't really know what to do from the get-go. The great thing about the Patronicity program for us was that we had mentorship throughout the entire process. Everything from them coming out and helping to do the video to really showcase our community in the light that we wanted it to be showcased in. All the way through, edits and feedback and everything on the actual proposal that we had to submit that would go to MassDevelopment. And it was also an incredibly there wasn't a ton of time between when we submitted to when we received approvals. And that was a nice thing too, because a lot of times when you apply for grants, you find that, you apply for it and then 8 months, 10 months later is when you actually hear. So it sort of is like this speed bump in a project. And for us, it was an incredibly streamlined process, and it was really easy to work through the portal, both the human component of Patronicity, but then also the actual digital component as well. Very intuitive, easy to use, and easy to manage.
Now, Eric, as for yourself, I'm sure you're an old hand, obviously being in planning and community development, of dealing with the traditional grant process. How did you find it for you in terms of what you were trying to do, the difference between that traditional process and what Commonwealth Places and Patronicity does?
For one thing, especially compared to federal grants, it didn't have, umpteen pages of, Federal Register type of paperwork to review, and all kinds of, contractual attachments that had to be submitted with the application. So that was something that was very friendly. It was nice to be able to go online and fill out the form online, and we actually had a team of lots of one of the team members actually is here with me today, Dave Small, and so we could all kind of do our editing, and we need to have the key pieces, and then we were able to submit over to Jonathan for his review, and I'll echo Ben's comments. Jonathan was very helpful. It was like he kind of coached and mentored us along through the process, and we were able to get some feedback. What were some things that we were still needed to do, and like the budget for example. And once we got all that together, we submitted it, and again, like Ben said, it wasn't a very long period of time before we were ultimately approved, and from the time we initially first had a discussion.
Just to stay with you for a second, Eric, we often talk to people like you who come to us, community members, nonprofits, leaders in local government, and a lot of them have never even done like a bake sale. They're not asking for money. Sometimes I say it's one of those third rails, like people don't like to talk about money, sex, politics, religion. Sometimes those things get people a little uncomfortable. So asking for money, going into the community and saying, hey, we're trying to do this, may put them in a position where they don't feel that comfortable. How did this process of having the page, working with Patronicity under Commonwealth Places, how was that process for you to go out into the community and to see where that was in terms of finding the interest and finding support?
I think maybe because of the fact that Orange, which has some similar characteristics and demographics to Athol, had their project successful previously for the Pocket Park, maybe it got my many defenses or concerns I had, were then let down, and was comfortable enough to go out to the community. I think the community was a little bit aware about this dock project already, and once we actually had the approvals of Patronicity, we actually prepared like a press release, got the information on Facebook, our town website and so forth, and kind of just really hit the throttle forward on it. So so I think because of the comfort level with Orange already working on it successfully, I felt I was ready to put this full throttle out.
And as for yourself, any experience with bake sales, and how did that work in terms of moving over to crowdfunding and going to the community?
Sure. So we took some interesting routes to really less so interesting routes to the fundraising piece, but interesting routes to the attention grabbing piece. We're fortunate enough to have a wide array of ages in the Eagle Street Initiative, everywhere from teenagers up through folks in their 70s. And so everyone has their own unique networks to reach out to. And that was something that we really capitalized on in terms of our outreach mechanisms, where you had people that were willing to go door to door to businesses, were willing to go to the banks and actually ask them, to help support these projects, to really get them as kind of the larger keystone contributors. But then at a very grassroots level, we did some very interesting things. One of the vendors on the street is actually a hot dog stand, and they contributed 150 hot dogs, and we had a hot dog eating competition. And each participant had to fundraise a certain number of dollars to participate in the competition. And so that, right there, we raised $1,500 through the hot dog eating competition. But we also created a viral campaign for the video that we produced. I also I ate an entire large pizza myself, and I required myself to fundraise $250 before I would do so. And I ate it on YouTube dressed as Cookie Monster. And so it was these kind of crazy, wonky things. But what they did is they inspired different groups of people that may not have contributed or even thought about this project to now have it highlighted on their social media networks and the different feeds that they're paying attention to, because it did kind of, it was off kilter, it was out of the ordinary and outside the box.
I don't know. Can you top that, Eric? I don't know. Do you have someone dressing in outfits and eating large amounts of pizzas or something?
I can't top that, I will admit. But I will say that one other thing that we felt comfortable about going to the community about was the fact that we had this match. It's kind of like a fundraiser on NPR, or like one of your favorite internet radio stations or something like that. Whereas the fact that people are going to provide some funding would help us get to the match, basically double the funds we'd be raising locally. And the fact that we had clear, articulate, definitive goals to reach towards, I think, was something else to help make our comfort level and made the project a success.
And that was one of the things I wanted to stick with you real quick, Eric, is, when you went out with the process, as you said, Jonathan, great coach, he runs Commonwealth Places program in Massachusetts for Patronicity. Probably gave you a lot of guidance in terms of how to put that project together, how to go out to the community. But what was something that came up that maybe you didn't expect, that either was fortuitous or maybe was a bit of a challenge?
One thing, and I sort of learned, and I see that, Ben really kind of went forward or aiming high, and we actually have a second project here now we've been successful with, is we should ask for more. I think we should have asked for more funding than we did. This is the first time that I was involved in this kind of initiative, and so I kind of just did the bare bones level, that $5,000. But I think that one thing I would do differently, or I didn't expect to get over the amount, is what we did, the $1,500 over our amount. That's a good thing. That's a good problem to have.
Yeah, so you said that basically that there was an interest in the community that you really feel maybe you didn't realize.
Correct.
Ben, as for yourself, was there something that was rather fortuitous or maybe a challenge as you were going out to do this?
Yeah, I mean, I think the probably the biggest challenge is that getting over that comfort level of actually going to somebody and asking them outright to contribute, especially at the higher number levels. Those folks don't tend to happen organically, although we did have one large contributor who came to us completely organically. So that was probably the biggest challenge. But in terms of kind of the fortuitous situations, when people grabbed onto the spirit of this campaign, there was a couple folks that really stepped up. And, one of them, for instance, was willing to do a 48-hour match where they matched up to $2,000 total of contributions over a 48-hour period, and being able to use that as a way to really amp up contributions in that period was great. And we hit that match number. We fulfilled that, and we were able to say that basically every dollar that was donated was tripled by the fact that this person was matching them, and then we were also getting a match from MassDevelopment. We had another individual who owns a restaurant on the street, or owned a restaurant on the street, and actually has since sold that to someone else who's doing great work there too, and was matched their dollars with gift certificates. So was willing to, if you gave a certain amount to the campaign, they were going to basically give you a gift certificate to their restaurant in that amount to celebrate your contribution. And you ended up with these really kind of converging competitions and driving forces that brought out a lot more folks in very large numbers very quickly at certain points along the campaign.
Sounds good. Just real quick, Ben, I was thinking, and you've talked about so many different ways in which you were able to leverage this. As you were saying, you had a community member that was willing to do a match. You had a lot of good social marketing through people who were willing to dress up or to do certain particular things if you hit a certain level. So that's all great. I was wondering if there were a few tips that you would give people who maybe it's under Commonwealth Places, maybe it's any sort of community crowdfunding that they're thinking of. What would be a few tips if they're thinking about starting a campaign? What would you say these are some things to consider?
Sure. So a few things that I would consider is I would make sure that people that are contributing expertise to your project, make sure that you cover a breadth of ages. I think it's nice to have a core group because it's easy to pivot with a small group, but you want to have input from a broader set of demographics in how you are doing your outreach. You know, I may not have thought about a hot dog eating competition if a colleague hadn't said so. And, you know, being able to gather ideas that are specific to your community is going to be really important, because every community or every project is going to have a different taste to it, a different flavor, and you want to make sure that you're tapping into that vein. The other thing I would say is that in most communities now, there are people who have done crowdfunding campaigns for one thing or another. That could be everything from trying to fundraise for a trip for a school group to starting a business and doing, you know, a crowdfunding in that respect. You know, if you can find where those people are, I would say do outreach to them, because there are transferable best practices that you can pull from pretty much any crowdfunding campaign and apply to something like what Patronicity does, because it's a very similar system. And then the last thing I would say is, you know, never say that there's a conduit that's not worth tapping into. You know, for us, I never thought to, you know, reach out to the radio stations to get on the radio to talk about this. And come to find out, you know, the radio market in this particular area is very strong, and a lot of people listen to it, and it garners a lot of attention. Other communities, it might just be the board at a cafe, you know, putting up a poster that talks about your campaign. There are people that only pay attention to certain things, but you know, you have to sort of include all of those mechanisms, both tangible physical ones and online digital ones, to capture as broad an audience as possible.
Now, Eric, as for yourself, any particular tips for those who may be starting out, coming forward to consider a campaign?
I think one thing to do is, you know, go on, now that you guys are building a kind of library of project, go on and review some of the past projects out there to see, you know, as Ben alluded to earlier, how it's, you know, it's the Commonwealth Places project. So, you know, in Eagle Street's a place in your case, and we have a place here with our dock. Well, even though I didn't see any similar projects to our dock project, you know, so just getting ideas of what was done, even some communities I'm very familiar with. For example, you know, I lived and worked on Cape Cod for a long time, and there was a Hyannis project that just kind of tweaked my interest in some things they were doing and helped just kind of, you know, help me get my ideas framed a little bit better. But then develop a project budget. I think that's another thing, you know, ultimately you're going to need to have that. But even if the estimates are kind of rough estimates, I mean, just to have the budget together is going to be important. And then finally, something I talked about a little bit earlier is the fact is just don't be shy in your ask. You know, I think aim high is something that we've learned here as well.
One of the things that I wanted to ask Eric, you alluded to it a little bit, is that you did the first project and then there was a second project. And I was wondering, from that first project, what are some updates related to it? And is there a correlation that you see between the first and then the second in terms of how that came together?
We actually go to one of our slides, our project slides. I could tell you it was because it's related to the event that we had recently last month. There we go, right there. So the picture on your left. Last month, you know, we actually had a ribbon cutting ceremony here. You know, some of the people on the screen there, including myself and Dave Small, who's with me, include our state legislatures, our local state rep and state senator, came out for the event. And you know, even though it was kind of a rainy day, the weather held off, and it was very, you know, well attended and a successful community event. So that was exciting because it took us a while to get there. We actually had a challenge with the project itself about a year ago. You know, we actually had raised the funds, you know, in spring or early summer of 2017, and we're actually going to put this dock in June of 17. But we experienced heavy floods that spring, and we just didn't have the land to put the dock in because the river was up so high. So we ended up not getting this dock installed until later last summer, but we really didn't want to do the public opening again until the spring. So, you know, our dock is in now, as I said, and it was exciting to have the successful community event last month with the ribbon cutting ceremony. And we are in this building today it's called the Mills River Environmental Center, and it's a formal school building built about 1900 or so. And so, you know, it's always lacks full accessibility to all users, and you know, maybe I'll just run over quick at Dave Small and get a little brief update about that project, which again went through a successful campaign fundraising effort recently.
Yeah, we had asked for $10,000, you know, from to match, to raise $10,000 to match it, so we'd get 20 to again improve accessibility to the building, do some community art, and stuff. And this is very close to the accessible dock, so these parks are kind of joined together at the hip. So it's pretty cool that we were able to do that. We raised 17,000 instead of 10. So I mean, it really worked out well. I want to just make one thing: the videos that you created, for the project, we were able to actually take the video and use the sound of it with the local radio station as a public service announcement, and we also had it on the local cable TV. So I mean, we were able to do a couple things with that video that were pretty cool, and they played that a lot. And I think that helped, generate knowledge of the project to a different audience that we're not ordinarily talking to, perhaps.
Well, that's great. It's glad to hear that there's a tail to these projects. And Ben, I was going to ask, you said you're still in process on particular elements of it. Just wondering where the updates have been for you.
Yeah, sure. So so far, our parklet is in place. I forgot to mention before that the Pocket Park that's directly adjacent, there was already a small little park space, quote unquote park, which is basically a bench and some gravel and a couple trees. That has been totally refreshed and expanded. And so that's another piece where we're working on that. We cobblestoned it with historic cobblestones from parts of the city that were taken apart years ago. We put in a artistic zoetrope, which is like a very vintage way of creating a moving picture, but it's an outdoor version of that, and created a bunch of seating there. So those are parts that have been done. The pedestrian-facing signage for every single business and storefront on the street is going in over the next couple of weeks. Our 2 posts with our medallions at the top are also going in the next couple of weeks. Trash cans and recycling is already out. We've added benches that are already out. And then our banner will be going at the end of the street a little bit later in August. The mural is also going to be going up in the next couple of weeks. And we have a light art installation that's going to be fabricated and put up hopefully by the end of August. So we are actually holding our ribbon cutting for the entire program on August 15th to really celebrate where we've come so far and to showcase a bit of what's going next. The nice thing for us too is that this project has helped to inspire other things to happen on the street. We've seen buildings being put on the market and sold and purchased for new redevelopment. We've seen some that have already been completely renovated that have been, have sat vacant for 15 plus years, just during the course of this project actually happening. We've also seen, some in-kind contributions like I referenced before. For instance, the local gas company was doing some gas line work, and the mayor of the city worked with them to have them completely repave the entire street, which was about a $35,000 project. And they weren't planning on doing that, but because of the way that these pieces were coming together, the administration really advocated for us and created that energy for them. We also have an art project that the local high school students did, where we had these historic old little fire pole boxes that were all decommissioned, and they've got 10 of those and painted them artistically. And those are being installed to actually create a visual corridor from MassMocha all the way over to Eagle Street. So it creates kind of a pearl chain of art to actually get you over to Eagle. So these are all pieces that kind of came together that weren't originally part of the project, but have now become part of that gravitational pull of what the Eagle Street Initiative is all about. And so we're really excited to see all these things happening. And over the next month, we're going to go from just having a parklet in place to really a full new visual of what Eagle Street looked like.
And that's great. I love when I hear about the projects that have been created that become catalysts. They become these anchors, these new things that can then create, as you were saying, Ben, new activated storefronts or various other ideas within the community. But even more than that, maybe just the development of new connections or people coming forward that maybe you hadn't expected in your town. So, Eric, I was wondering if you've seen anything like that. People who maybe had sat on the sidelines, maybe weren't involved as much in community as before, saw your campaigns, and maybe they're taking part or doing something new.
Well, I will say one group that's always been active in the community is the Athol Lions Club, and but they actually wanted to make a direct pitch to this project, and so they were involved with, and also the Mills River Watershed Coalition. Between the two efforts, they helped with such things as an additional bench, for example, and the Lions Club is now want to focus on one of our other parks in the community, Silver Lake Park, which is kind of another hidden jewel of the town, that they might be actually looking at a project for Patronicity next year for ultimately. So, and I didn't really get a chance previously to know so many people from the Lions Club, but now I have more connection to them than I did previously. So that's one example I can think of there.
Excellent. Well, Eric, you've had 2 projects successful. What's next? Do you see an opportunity to work on other things, or maybe has the community had enough? I don't know.
No, I mean, I said we're already sort of thinking about this. It's called the Silver Lake Park. It's actually essentially walkable from our downtown, but it's a little bit further north, and it definitely needs some good old TLC and some enhancements to it. But learning more about Ben's project here. Previously, when I got to know Ben initially, we were preparing for this webinar, and then hearing him present more today formally, thinking that our downtown and some elements could definitely be opportunity for a Patronicity effort as well too. So the mind's definitely kicking in, and I can see potentially two projects for those 2 areas happening in the near future.
Now, Ben, as for yourself, you said, ribbon cutting's coming up. People are invited to that. So you've got all this great stuff happening. Do you see something new or next for you as well?
Yeah, so my wife and my infant son would argue that I'm done for a while when it comes to these projects. They're definitely a labor of love, and a lot of energy and hours go into these things, and it's great to see the product come together. That being said, one of the great things that I've seen is that over the course of this project, because we've seen successes and we've benchmarked along the way, and we've gotten into the media along the way as well, we're seeing other people kind of come out of the rafters and show interest in doing projects of their own. So I think, whether it's through Patronicity or it's just grassroots kind of efforts that are happening, we're definitely seeing energy around some new initiatives. And I'm sure within the next year, as soon as this project is fully completed financially through the Patronicity and MassDevelopment programs, we're going to see another 1 or 2 North Adams projects that come together. And that's what's exciting. Again, you mentioned the word catalyst, and I think that the Eagle Street Initiative was catalyzed by the Small Business Revolution, which we went through, and we were a finalist in a few months before we did our campaign. And I think now this has become a catalyst for other things that are occurring, which you hope that you get this kind of pay it forward kind of approach, where you put all this energy and investment into something physically, mentally, emotionally, and then you see that pay benefits and dividends for generations of future projects. And I definitely know that I will not completely back away from anything, because I'm always going to be heavily involved. But with Eagle Street, we're definitely looking at more of the programmatic side of things now. Like I talked about, we have these coffee dates that sort of organically came together, and those are happening every week. And we're seeing community organizations sponsoring those. And that is where a lot of these new ideas are starting to bubble up. And people are saying, wow, this happened. I bet we could do X, Y, Z. Why don't we partner on something? And so, yes, I can say that it may not be me as the person taking the lead on it, but there's definitely going to be future projects happening in the city of North Adams.
Sounds great. Before we go to the questions from those who are on the webinar, and if you have any, please feel free to put them into the question box on the right side, and we'll get to them in just a minute. I just wanted to ask real quick, Ben, the last one from me at this point. If you were to give 3 tips, knowing everything you know now, from starting the process to running your campaign to, the cleanup and finishing it off now, if you give 3 tips to anybody who's out there, what would they be in terms of things to think about or little things that maybe help them on the way?
Sure. So the first thing is make a friend before you need a friend. If you have an idea and a concept that you think you might want to execute, begin engaging with people now. Even if you don't necessarily know how all the pieces will come together, you never know what human resources and financial resources might be out there unless you start that network early. So make sure that you're doing that. Secondly, I would say it's great to shoot for the stars. So have a really big master plan. If you have a big project, don't be shy about thinking about all those pieces, but be realistic to what your community capacity is in terms of giving, in terms of what benchmark you can actually hit. Because again, with certain fundraising things, if you don't hit your benchmark, you don't get the match. or any of the match for that matter. So make sure that, if you have this big vision, if you can break it up into small chunks and do one chunk with a particular fundraising effort, do it that way. At least you can work on these things kind of in modular pieces, and you never know how that might catalyze the next piece. And then the third piece that I would say is really be thankful for the people that do contribute. One thing that we did is we did have different levels of donor recognition, and make sure that you're fulfilling those, whether it's fulfillment during the actual process of fundraising or it's fulfillment over time. So for instance, we're having a donor reception as part of our ribbon cutting, and it's very specifically to celebrate the contributions that these folks, whether it was financial or it was people that donated significant time to the project. We really want to make sure that they know that their efforts and their contributions are celebrated and are appreciated, because they've made this a fully community-owned endeavor. So making sure that whatever you do put out there as a reward or a benefit for contributing is fulfilled and is really showcased, whether that's in the media or it's in just materials going out or a website or whatever, making sure that you really do acknowledge that.
Well, thanks. And Eric, as for yourself, going through that entire process from, we got an idea, blueprint, get it onto Patronicity, move it forward to the end. What would you say if there were three things you were going to tell someone who was in your position maybe a year or so back? Here's things to think about.
Well, I'll kind of build on some of the things I said previously, but one is certainly kind of review some of the existing projects that have already been through the Patronicity system that have been successfully implemented, but also, reach out to the to Patronicity, Jonathan, and your team over there. I think if we like our project was kind of unique at the time. I think reach out to your team there, and they're very well help coach and mentor folks to get a project together. And kind of building on what Ben said, kind of have your project budget. I like the idea of that master plan. That Silver Lake Park project I told you about, we hopefully want to do maybe next year. We're actually going to undertake a master plan for that park ultimately first. That's one of our first things we're going to do. We're hoping to actually undertake that in the spring. And again, don't be shy in the ask. I think aim high, and also I want to build on what Ben said too, where make sure you acknowledge the folks who funded it. I didn't mention before, but one of our other signage elements was actually a donor plaque identification sign, and I think it came very well done. Some of the larger donors we actually put like in with their icons, for example, as well too. And I think those are some of the three key takeaways.
Excellent. Well, Eric, thank you so much. Right now is the time that we'll get into the questions from you, the audience, if you're on the webinar, and feel free to type them into the questions box over there on the right. But I'm going to kick it over to Veronica. She has a question, and she's going to take you home.
All right. So if anyone has any questions, please enter those on the right. But I do have a question that popped into my head based on some of what you were saying, Ben, which I think is so important to this entire process, which is team building and networking. And you have highlighted that a couple of times in your comments about how important it is to do early, to make sure that the team that you're working with is diverse, and diverse in age is what you were highlighting, but I think diversity in general is something that we would recommend. So I'm wondering if you could give some really easy tips and tricks for someone who is just starting out, has this idea, wants to solve a community problem, but doesn't have any experience in this work, maybe doesn't have that network started. How would they start that work?
Sure. So for us, it was fairly straightforward. It was a very targeted area, and there was businesses there and people that lived there, and so those were really the first folks that we wanted to talk to. So the Eagle Street Initiative would not exist if it weren't for actually going into Eagle Street and asking what the neighbors needed, what they wanted to see Eagle Street look like. Before we ever heard of Patronicity, we were putting together a mission and vision statement for the Eagle Street Initiative, and doing these, design thinking workshops with folks that, from all across the street, and the neighbors, whether they live there, own there, or have businesses there. And so what I would say is, you can't do community placemaking if you don't go to that place and meet the people that are already there. It isn't really sustainable if you look at a place from a distance and you just say, this needs to become this, without actually engaging with the folks that are most directly impacted. So, just going into if it's a restaurant or a store and just talking to the people there, if they neighbor a vacant property and you're like, man, that could really be an awesome this, that, or the other thing. We'll talk to the people that are neighbors to it first, so that, you're not jumping the gun and coming up with an idea that maybe has been tried or maybe would be totally counter to what the community is looking for in that particular area. Getting all that input is really imperative. And I think, starting that before you ever really put anything on paper in terms of what your master plan is, you need to have those voices in the room. So, start very, ground level. If you just want to say, hey, I'm going to be having coffee and I want to hear ideas for this particular area of our town or our community, everyone can come and are welcome. You can put that out on Facebook or a community posting board or whatever the case might be. Whatever mechanism works best to start to curate minds and opinions together.
Awesome. Eric, do you have anything to add to that?
I think, working with the organizations that are already, supportive of your work. For example, I mentioned the Lions Club. One group I didn't mention, we actually have a Friends of the Alny Ridge Park, active citizens are trying to maintain, this park that's already there. It's a waterfront park, but there's some beautiful trails in the area, for example, and, they helped with the fundraising effort, through their networking. It's kind of, you tell a friend and they tell two friends, et cetera, and I think that's something that, use your network and their networking to help make a successful fundraising effort.
Awesome. Well, that was the one question that popped into my head today. It doesn't look like anyone else has anything to add. So on the last screen of the webinar, you should see all of our emails. If you have any questions about Patronicity, about these projects, if you want to reach out to Eric and Ben, they're both willing to take any questions or talk some project ideas through with you. If you want to reach out to myself, to Rob, if you are in Massachusetts, we can connect you to Jonathan. If you're in Michigan, we can connect you to Mihaela, who is our coach in Michigan. Please feel free to reach out with any questions, comments. I will be sending out an email hopefully tomorrow, possibly early next week, with a recording of today's webinar, a recording of our last webinar with projects from Indiana, and then a link to sign up for our next webinar in a couple of weeks featuring 3 projects from Michigan, which we're really excited about. So that's it for today. Thank you again for hopping on, and thank you, Eric and Ben, for being willing to share your stories. I think this was really helpful. I know I learned a lot. I'm hoping everyone else on the line learned a lot. So yeah, thank you, and I hope everyone else has a great day.